So we up and running, kind.
All right. Questions online? Anyone? Questions?
No questions online so far, sir.
Give it a sec. Any questions?
That's a lot. They still sending the data to our channels.
Still sending what?
Sending the data to our channels. We are online fully. We got all of them online except for the Rhode Island YouTube.
So everyone's good? Every channel's good? Salak.
Rhode Island YouTube, the only one giving issues.
Don't sweat. So we back up and running, right?
Current, sir.
Okay, let's get it. Freddie, put that behind the chair for me. Water. Okay. We're going to dive into ancient Greece today. The reason why I kind of want to touch upon ancient Greece, I think I want to spend the whole month on the book of Maccabees and kind of dive into how the Jews were Hellenized by the Greeks and how they were forbidden to keep their laws, their own laws, our laws, and how they were forbidden from, doing the traditional sacrifices that we did, and did abominable things in the sight of the Lord. And the book of Maccabees really shows or really portrays the traitors that Israel has always succumbed. The traitors that have always sided with the heathens, and the rich of Israel that have polluted what the Lord has made holy, and has polluted the minds of the Lord's people. But before we get into that, we gotta, kind of dive into some of the pioneers that led to this particular captivity. More specifically, we're going to start with Phillips II. Let's see, we're going to start with Phillips II of Macedon. Around this time, around that time when Philip was in power, I want to say between 359 BCE and 336 BCE, the Isles of the Grecians were constantly at war, you know what I mean? The Greeks were always going through some sort of civil war, and Macedonia played a big part in Alexander the Greek's conquest. Keep in mind, Philip II was the father of Alexander the Greek. We'll never call him the Great, but we will call him the Greek. And we'll kind of dive in on how Alexander was able to, or how Philip II, his father, set the stage for Alexander, a young man. I want to say he was around his 20s, real young military commander and king, how he set the stage for them to beat the Persian and the Medes Empire. But first, let's go to Daniel, chapter 5. Daniel had prophesied something in chapter 5 that was going to lead to us being under Greek occupation. The Greeks did so much damage to our people that when Paul came on the scene, it was very hard for him to convince those that were born in Jerusalem, that knew the law and that kept the law, who they would call the circumcised, how they weren't accepting the uncircumcised, or those that were in Asia Minor, like Corinth, like Thessalonian, like the Thessalonians, like the Corinthians. They weren't acceptant of them because they were of the uncircumcised. They basically considered them as heathens. You know, at one point, before, you know, any brother or sister came into the school, we would have been considered the uncircumcised. You know what I mean? Meaning we didn't get, we've never kept the Passover before we came into this truth. We were never circumcised on the 8th day. Was it 7th day? On the 8th day. On the 8th day. We weren't circumcised on the 8th day. Nor did we know the laws of the Most High, even though the laws, it says the laws was written in the tables of our heart. But we were estranged to the ordinances of the Most High. So we're gonna do before we dive into the first chapter of Maccabees, we got to get a timeline of what was going on prior to that, and which when you get into Maccabees, it kind of, that first chapter kind of gives you a short synopsis of of Alexander and his conquests and the nations that he conquered, and then it leads to his death, which then leads to his 4 generals splitting up the province of the kingdom. Now, another thing I want to bring up is that, you know, when you think about, you know, black fraternities and sororities, how they branded themselves with Greek tattoos, and how a lot of the culture that you see in the United States has a Greek accent to it. You know what I mean? Just like a lot of the culture and a lot of the philosophies in America also have a Roman accent to it. So keep in mind where, you know, why this part of history is important is to understand that what led to our captivity, and to understand those the mission that Paul was on to save the Gentiles. And when I say the Gentiles, I'm talking about Israelites that were in former captivity under the Grecians, also under the Assyrians prior to that. So let's go to Daniel chapter 5.
What verse?
So let me get there. Yeah, if y'all are online, pull up the book of Daniel. Let's get it real quick, and let's pull up the prophecy in chapter 5 where it talks about the 4 empires. You know what I'm talking about, Rob?
I think you might want to start at 1, because that's what it's basically all about.
Okay. Let me just... So Daniel went through quite a few kings. Belteshazzar was one of them, and Darius was another one, as well as Nebuchadnezzar was another one. Daniel came into Babylon at a young age, along with, you know, brothers like Meshach, Abednego, and what's the other guy's name?
Meshach,
Meshach, Abednego. I forget the other brother's name, but he came into captivity under the Babylonians as a young man. And Jeremiah was the one trying to warn them that they would go into captivity. And Jeremiah went through hell trying to warn the people that they would go into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. And so now we dive into Daniel, who the Lord has given him, you know, has given him the gift of insight or visions. And so Daniel had a vision in chapter 5. Let's get to it. Okay. Jump to so the Salaki, this is when he lets the king know Salaki, let me find it. Salaki, let me just pull this up. All right. Actually, go to chapter 7. Salaki, start at go ahead. Yeah, start at verse 1.
Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed.
Belteshazzar, remember the Lord wrote something on the wall, right? He was having a feast, and he was taking the stuff like the silver and gold, right? And he was having a great feast, and the Lord wrote something on the wall that scared him, that scared him half to death. And so the Lord split the kingdom into Persia and the Medes because of Belteshazzar and the evil that he was doing. Go ahead.
Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters.
Go ahead.
Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea.
Go ahead.
And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another.
So Daniel is about to explain the four kingdoms that came up. And these are the four great kingdoms that we can historically recall. And we're gonna just make this quick, but just keep reading.
Verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings.
Yep.
I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
And a man's heart was given to it. So the first kingdom represented I believe that's the Persian Mede Empire, right? And it says that a man's heart was given unto it. What does it mean when it says a man's heart was given unto it?
Lost me on that one, sir.
If a man's heart, if you see it,
Man's desire.
meaning this man could be afraid, is what I'm saying, is what they're trying to say. A man's heart was given onto it, right? So it represents this man being afraid. That's what it represents. Keep reading.
And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Salaki.
So, go ahead.
After this I beheld.
Salaki, let me just get this right. The first one, there's 4 empires that he's about to describe. The Persian Mede Empire. The second one, Salaki, the third one is the Greek Empire. The fourth one is the Roman Empire. Jump to the third one. This is what we need so we can get to it.
I don't want to come.
Yeah, go ahead. This is the one we need, number 6.
And after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
Okay, so now Daniel made a prophecy, right? Which is going to be mentioned in 1 Maccabees chapter 1. And so this is talking about the leopard represents the Greek Empire. And so Alexander the Greek had 4 commanders. And so the 4 wings of a fowl, read that part one more time.
Which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl.
Imagine a leopard, right? And on the back of the leopard has 4 wings, right? What are the wings are doing? The wings are supporting this leopard, right? It's allowing it to fly, right? It's allowing it to, conquer, right? The 4 wings, and keep reading.
The beast had also 4 heads.
The 4 heads were the 4 commanders under Alexander the Greek. And so around the time of the Maccabees, when Alexander the Greek had died, those 4 commanders split the province into 4, right? Keep reading.
After this I saw in the night...
the last part of 6.
And dominion was given to it.
And dominion was given to it. And so basically these 4 commanders these 4 generals under Alexander the Greek was given dominion of basically the whole known world, including Asia Minor, the Isles of Greek, India, all those isles of the Gentiles, they were given dominion over. So the first one was the Assyrian Empire. The second one was the Persian Mede Empire. One was the Greek Empire, and the 4th one was the Roman Empire. This is the vision that Daniel had and had prophesied would come about. So now, let's go to 1 Maccabees chapter 1. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people will say that you guys only use the Bible, right? And it's a fact. That's what we use as our main source to prove all things. But it does substantiate with history. It does fall in line with history. And so when the Roman Catholic Church decided to take out these 14 books, I want to say mid-century 1700s, they took out a huge part of our history. And so now you're running around with 66 of those books, and it's like watching a movie, right? And then an hour into the movie, I take out 30 minutes of the scene.
Oh, climax, gone.
You know what I mean? And I just jump to the end. She just jumped to the ending. You can't do that. You want to know what happened in between. It's like, okay, we're watching a movie. I want to say 45 minutes to an hour in. It's getting juicy. And then it fast forwards about 45 minutes, and then it's like, now you're trying to clue in together. How did they start speaking Greek? You know what I mean? How did they become Gentiles? How did they become uncircumcised? When this whole thing will explain how that came about. You can't take out the middle, you can't take out any scenes, because now you can't connect the dot. Which is why a lot of Christians are confused, because now we stop at the book of Malachi, and then what? And then we just jump to Christ?
About what? That's not good. 600 year difference?
We just jump to the Romans? How are we going to go from the Persian and Medes to the Assyrians to the Romans? It makes no sense. No. You know what I mean? There's a huge gap missing. But go ahead. Let's do 1 Maccabees chapter 1.
Start from the top?
Yes. So basically what I'm doing is I want to key in some of these figures to prove the authenticity of the history of the Bible and all the historians that have written about these figures. It's in the Bible. This book is not a fairy tale. This book is actually our history. You know what I mean? Salaki, bro. Let me get there with you. And keep in mind, right? When you get to 1611, right after Malachi comes what?
Comes Esdras.
First Esdras, second Esdras, right? Yeah. And those 14 books are in succession right after Malachi. Okay. Because that's the order of history that it's going. You know what I mean? Now, there's times where you read the book of Chronicles, and the book of Chronicles will jump back and forth between history, right? There's times where, you'll get a prophecy, and now you got to jump forward to what we're doing right now, to First Maccabees, to show one of the 4 kingdoms that Daniel had visioned. But go ahead.
First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim.
Okay, so at Philip, so we spoke about Philip earlier. This is Philip of the second of Macedon. On your Google machine, right? Type in Philip II. If you can find the quickest synopsis of Philip II.
Got something on Wikipedia.
Give me something else. It might be. Is it quick enough?
Oh, you joining my bandwagon? Hold on.
Give me a Britannica. Britannica might be a little bit
Britannica's
more.
the dopest.
Yeah, give me Britannica. Just a quick synopsis, because I don't want to waste too much time.
Philip, second king of Macedonia. Philip II, king of Macedonia.
Hold on, let me get there with you. Okay, Philip Salaki. Yeah, this is cool. I'll take this. Give me this. Yes. Jump to. Go ahead. Start in the beginning.
You said start from the top, sir?
Yeah.
Count out of one count. Lock it.
If it wasn't for Philip II, Alexander would have never conquered the known world. You know what I mean?
Philip II, king of Macedonia, Britannica. Philip II, by name Philip of Macedon.
Yep.
Born 382 BCE, died 336. Now Virgin of Greece. 18th king of Macedonia. His reign was through 359 BC to 336
So
BC.
he reigned 23 years.
Who restored internal peace to his country, and by 339 had gained domination over all of Greece by military and diplomatic means.
So Philip II was a military genius. You know what I mean? The tactics that he used surpassed any military commander at that time. Go ahead.
Thus laying the foundation for its expansion under his son, Alexander III, the Greek.
And Alexander was the one that was able to expand that empire. But Philip had a lot of diplomatic issues within Greece. You know what I mean? Macedon was a particular isle in Greece, but there was a lot of political warfare going on at that time, in the midst of a lot of civil war going on in Greece at the time. But go ahead.
Early life and accession.
Jump out of that. We don't want to. Give me the Macedonian expansion. Jump a little further down.
Macedonian expansion. In 358, he invaded Panoia, and then he defeated the Illyrians decisively, in a battle that already suggests a master of war.
But
The next year, his marriage with Olympias, the Malaysian princess of Epirus.
now Olympias, right? Here was the issue. Philip wanted to have when Philip had Alexander the Great, the Greek, he had it with a woman that wasn't a Macedonian.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And so what Philip wanted was, Philip wanted a full-blooded child, right? So this woman, Olympias, plays a big role, considering, we'll jump to the death of Philip, but she plays a big role in helping her son come into power. But go ahead.
The mother of Alexander the Greek helped to stabilize his western frontier. Now he ventured to antagonize Athens by recapturing Philippolis, the strategic key securing the eastern frontier.
Jump down to the next one.
To the presidency.
Right above that.
The 10-year war of Amphipolis with Athens showed that the Athenians, with all their naval power, were quite unable to damage the continental and military power of Macedonia, or even to save their own allies from Philip's attack.
Keep going.
Meanwhile, he twice penetrated deeply into Thrace.
Go ahead.
And in the south of Thessaly.
Thessaly, which is where the Thessalonians come from, right? Which was the Isles of the Gentiles. That's where the Thessalonians come from. All right, just check them out. Just check them out. Yeah, go ahead. Which is the Isles of the Thessalonians, right? So basically, what I'm showing here is that places like Corinth, places like Thessaly, were places that were occupied by Greeks, where Israelites were living in, and were Hellenized by the Greeks, if you know what I mean. Keep reading when you get a chance.
Time out of one car.
What's it, brother? Yeah. Go ahead.
Where was I at? Thessaly. Divided against itself gave him an entry into Greece.
Now, jump down to, I want to get right to the point of this. Jump down to the League of Corinth. So he set up two leagues. He set up the League of Thessaly, where he proclaimed himself to be president, and the League of Corinth. Now, the reason why these leagues were important is that by the time he came into total domination, and because he was president of these leagues, he was able to get the other Grecian isles to send soldiers and troopers and naval power to fight the Persians and the Medes. He was able to use that, and his son, by the time Philip had been assassinated, his son came in and still had these leagues in place where he was able to just get all of them, considering that they all were, going through civil war. When it came time to go up against the Persians and the Medes, this played a critical role, and it's where you kind of like, you ever remember the story of the Spartans? A lot of fake Israelites like to, consider themselves to be the Spartans, but the Spartans were not Israelites. But what was happening was that because we were under Persian and Mede captivity, because we were in their empire, Israelites fought against the Spartans, and we eventually, whooped their ass. Excuse my language. You know what I mean? So next time you watch the movie 300, just be happy that we gave him a spanking. You know what I mean? As Israelites. But go ahead.
The League of Corinth. Right?
Yeah, give me that.
The League of Corinth Philip's so-called League of Corinth, established in 337, was an organization designed to preserve and perpetuate a general peace. Inaugurated when the delegates of all states of Greece, except Sparta, and the islands swore to abide by it and to recognize Philip as president. For this purpose, the general peace was a political innovation of the Greeks themselves, used several times in the past 50 years in attempts to stabilize affairs while promoting this or that hegemony.
Jump to the next one. Philip designed. Salaki. Jump to last year's. This is the one I want to get.
Slocking. I just freezing up on me.
Good. You don't got that?
Last year, Philip was wise, no doubt, to build on the foundation of the earlier practice of the Greeks themselves, and also to refrain from organizing them in any permanent alliance that would have recalled too much the unpalatable experiences of the past.
Go ahead.
He was not, however, a Greek politician or even a Greek, but king of Macedonians, and he cannot possibly have seen the settlement of Greece, as most modern historians have seen it, as the culmination of his life's work. For him to culminate it nothing, and was not even an end in itself by only a means.
Keep going.
Charonia had brought the Greeks to order, and his plans required that they should stay in order now.
Go ahead.
The Sanhedrians.
Charonia was a battle, and the victory of Charonia is what brought Greece together. You know what I'm saying? Which was able to help Alexander during the time when he was in power. It was able to help him, be victorious in his military conquest because of this particular victory of Canora. But go ahead.
The Sanhedrians at Corinth heard his program for a Persian war and duly acclaimed it early in 337.
Go ahead.
Early the next year, an advanced force of the Macedonian army crossed to Asia Minor.
So now this Macedonian army is crossing to Asia Minor now. Now keep in mind what takes place because we were under Persian and Mede. Go ahead. Because we were under Persian and Mede captivity, this is what takes place when Alexander comes into power, is us eventually being under Greek rule. And this is how this all played out. It's because of Philip II. Keep in mind, Philip II, basically the reason why he was able to get to this point is because he was excellent in using bribery and threats and warfare to get to this point, to align all the Greek isles together and eventually go into Asia Minor for world conquest. But go ahead.
Philip would lead the grand army into Asia presently, and the Greeks would be with him.
So this is the first time, I want to say, in Greek history where all the Greeks have culminated and come together to pursue world domination. But go ahead.
This meteor fizzled out. The subtle, pliant, patient, calculating diplomatist, master of timing in politics and war, ended his life in a tale of irresponsible incompetence.
Keep reading.
The historian Theopompus, who saw Philip at close quarters, made much of his vices.
Go ahead.
His love of drink and debauchery, and his wild extravagance with money.
Go ahead.
Allowance made for this notable fault-finding and puritanical writer. Philip's character did contain some real ambiguities. Extending into his domestic life, his political marriages were mostly opportune symbols of goodwill toward princes or groups worth conciliating.
So he knew how to make what you would call political marriages to bring kings. That's what they do. They'll marry a prince's king's daughter, or they're making alliances. He knew. He was very masterful in political affairs, even though he was not a politician. So keep reading. We can get right to it, and we're gonna jump out of here.
It's a lot.
You know about it.
Conciliating, but his last marriage in 338 to the Macedonian Cleopatra.
This is not the same Cleopatra that you're thinking of, but go ahead.
Led to a final break with Olympias, his queen, who left the country accompanied by the crown prince Alexander.
So now Olympias, Alexander's mother, leaves with Alexander. Right? Keep reading.
Though Olympias was unpopular at court and Cleopatra's connections were powerful and important, it was not politic to put the succession in jeopardy. Philip showed that he had never intended this result by taking the trouble to be reconciled with Alexander. The tradition that makes him infatuated with Cleopatra is probably right. If so, he fatally misjudged the amount of harm that could be done by marrying her.
And that's how a lot of great kings fall. A lot of great kings fall because of a woman. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to find out exactly how his life expired because of this woman. It's the next line. Yeah, next line right here. This is it. And then we're going to jump out of this and get back
with the preparation far advanced for the crossing into Asia, a grand feast was held at Agae to celebrate the wedding of Philip's daughter Cleopatra to Alexander of Epirus, brother of Olympias.
Go ahead.
There Philip was assassinated by Pausanias, a young Macedonian noble with a bitter grievance against the young queen's uncle Attalus and against Philip for denying him justice.
Okay, so something that happened with this devil right here, where he never received justice. Don't want to get into it, but he ends up killing Alexander's father, Philip II. Go ahead.
This was the official explanation, and Pausanias himself could add nothing to it. He was killed on the spot. Suspicion fell on Olympias and Alexander, thus with most to gain from Philip's death, and many modern interpreters have followed it.
We're going to jump out of that. So basically, once Philip dies, Philip wanted a full-blooded baby. Alexander, in his mind, was not a full-blooded. So what ended up happening is when Philip had a second child, second son, Alexander's mother, Olympias, had set it up where they were going to kill the child, which they successfully did. And Alexander, this is how Alexander was able to come to power. Originally, Alexander was not going to come to power because Philip wanted his son that was through a Macedonian woman instead of a woman outside of Macedonia. He was originally supposed to be in power. So just a lot of like history of like treachery, but to really get to the diving point of this, what we got to understand is this is what sets the stage for them to go into Asia Minor. His political affairs that he had with the Greeks that were always constantly fighting with each other, these are political affairs that he created, and the briberies that he put in place, and the military warfare that he put about, was able to get these regions to come together. And now we're going to jump into Alexander. Let's go to chapter 1 again.
First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1.
And that's just who Philip was. Keep in mind, what I'm doing is I'm tying in what historians have written down right? And I'm tying in with what's in the Bible, the history's in the Bible. They correlate, and you're going to find out. Right?
And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes.
Now, keep in mind, now here's another king, right? King Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, right? Keep reading.
That he reigned in his stead the first over Greece.
Okay, so now, give me, I got bookmarks for this too. Give me Darius the Third and let's keep the same source in Britannica. You see, let's tie all this in, you know what I mean? Okay.
It's loading up. Here we go. I got it. It's loading up.
Now, what role does Darius III play? Darius III, you know, he reigned for about, you know, I want to say about 6 years, right? And he was the ruler of the Achaemenid dynasty. And the Achaemenid dynasty ruled the Greek cities during that time. Which is why when we talk about the League of Corinth and the League of Thessalonica, this is King Philip of Macedon trying to get all the Greek cities to come together to break from this rulership. What you got to understand about our so-called oppressor is that the one thing that he does not allow is to be ruled over. And he understands that you know, coming together and bonding together is the only way where they're going to be able to come out of their captivity. Now, if Israelites understood this and understood that, why give me Zephaniah 2:1 real quick. If Israelites understood the state of affairs that we're in America and throughout the nations, and why the Lord, you know, wants us to be holy people that are going to come together to break the chain. Number one, the chain that's in our mind, the chain of darkness that's in our mind, and also to break the chain of, you got that? Zephaniah 2:1?
Come.
Yeah, let me get that.
Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 1.
Go ahead.
Gather yourself together.
Go ahead.
Yeah, gather yourself together.
More than ever, in the state of affairs that we're in the state of emergency that we're in America, the Lord is telling us to gather ourselves together. We're talking about all the tribes, the Hispanic tribes, the so-called Native Indian tribes, so-called Negroes, Haitians, Jamaicans. He's telling us to gather ourselves together because this is the only way you can break this is the only way that you can break out of this place spiritually and come together as a nation. But go ahead.
Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired.
Go ahead. Any more?
No more than that.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because we're a nation that's not desired. Now, keep in mind, the Greeks, this is just an ancient example of what was going on. The Greek cities, they were fighting each other. You know what I mean? Much like Haiti and Dominican Republic fight each other today. You know what I'm saying? These cities were fighting each other. But when it came time, when it came time to where a common enemy came on the scene, they formed these leagues to try to liberate themselves under their rulership. So let's read on this real quick. This is another figure in Maccabees that we're going to read about.
Darius the third, also called Cadamenus died 330 BC, Bacteria. The last king reigned 336 to 330 BC of the Achaemenid dynasty.
So he was the last king to reign of the Achaemenid dynasty, and he lost in a battle called Gaugamela. And this battle really put Alexander the Greek on top. You know what I'm saying? And Darius, he ran basically all the provinces in Asia Minor. And keep in mind, Israelites were under these provinces as well. But go ahead.
Darius belonged to a collateral branch of the royal family and was placed on the throne by the eunuch Bogeas, who had poisoned the two previous kings, Xerxes III and Arsus.
Salaki, I just want to look this up real quick. Just to pull up, what's his name?
It's actually Xerxes, but they put Artaxerxes.
Spell it?
A-R-T-A.
Spell it Xerxes?
Yeah.
It's X-E-R, right?
X-E-R-X-A-S the third. I mean X-E-S the third.
Yeah, so Artaxerxes. So this was the kings that ruled previous to him of the kings of Persia, it's right in the Bible the way it is. Read that one more time.
Darius belonged to
Artaxerxes.
That's how yeah. But
so this was the king. This was the king of Persia. When you read the book of Ezra, see now we're going down another timeline. When you read the book of Ezra, he was one of the kings. Either his father was one of the kings of Persia in the book of Ezra, and he could have been one of the sons. It doesn't say if he was the third, the second, or the first in the book of Ezra, but this would have been one of his sons that became king in his stead. But go ahead.
And Arsus, when Darius asserted his independence, Bogeas also attempted his murder, but was forced by the king to drink the poison himself.
Now, I believe Darius was the king that allowed Ezra to rebuild is it Ezra or Nehemiah? Salaki, let me just look this up real quick. Salaki. All right, let me get okay, so this was the king right after this king had died. Darius came into power. Darius was the one that allowed, I believe he was the one that allowed Nehemiah to rebuild the temple. Is that accurate? I believe that's accurate.
I'm not quite sure.
Salaki, I just want to. Yeah. So he allowed Salaki. Yeah, so he was the one that Nehemiah found favor in his sight, and he allowed Nehemiah to rebuild the temple. And this was at the height of the Persian and Mede Empire, when Darius was in rulership. So Nehemiah and Ezra play a big role under these two kings, Darius and Artaxerxes. But I don't want to get too far into it, but go ahead.
In 337, Philip II of Macedon had formed the League of Corinth for the purpose of liberating the Greek cities under Achaemenid rule, and early in 336 had sent an advanced force into Asia Minor.
Good.
In July, however, he was assassinated, perhaps at the instigation of Darius, in the spring of 334.
So this is talking about Philip being assassinated. We know about that, but go ahead.
Philip's son, Alexander the Great, crossed the Hellespont because Darius had made no serious preparation to resist the invasion.
Go ahead.
Alexander defeated the Achaemenid army at the Granicus, and by the following year had won most of Asia Minor and reached Cilicia.
So now, because of the defeat of the Achaemenid army and the defeat of Darius, this is when those regions in Asia Minor started to be Hellenized. And this is what Paul was fighting with the elders of Jerusalem at the time and with those that were of the circumcision. This is exactly what he was fighting, is the fact that the Greeks had come into Asia Minor and went around this time had Hellenized it and had caused us to and forbid us from keeping our laws, which is what Rock brought up with the mother and her 7 sons, you know, and what they went through under the Greeks. But go ahead.
Count out of one count.
And it's no different with, you know, it's no different with the Spanish Inquisition, how the Roman Catholics went into the isles of the Caribbean and tortured those people into worshiping their God. You know what I mean? Which is why you have a lot of Catholics in Central America, which is why you have a lot of Catholics in South America and the Caribbean, because of the torture methods that they were using. But go ahead.
Count out of one count. Darius finally advanced against him, but was defeated at Issus in the autumn of 333.
All right, so we're just going to jump out of that. So this is just a glimpse of who Darius was. You can read about him in Esdras and in Nehemiah as well. But go ahead. Let's go back to Maccabees, chapter 1. Now we're going to start at verse 2. We're going to talk about Alexander. And we're going to roll this into next week and really just dive into Alexander as we get closer to Hanukkah. We're really going to tie in, you know, most of First Maccabees, going into Second Maccabees as well. But go ahead.
Verse 2. And made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the king of the earth.
Now, keep in mind, you know, Alexander was also a military genius. He was trained and raised by the best of the Grecians. He was trained by the best philosophers. He was educated by the best philosophers, and he really, and he was untouchable at this time. Go ahead. And he reigned for a good 12 years. At the age of 20, starting at the age of 20, he went on his conquest after his father died. But go ahead.
And went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations.
Go ahead.
Insomuch that the earth was quiet before him.
Go ahead.
Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up.
And so pride is the one thing that Alexander really started. He really started to get puffed up, which eventually led to his downfall. And this devil thought he was untouchable. Proverbs 16:18, it says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Understand, it was the Most High that allowed Alexander to be successful in all of those military conquests. Don't get it twisted. And a lot of people, a lot of what history calls great military commanders and kings have always fall into the trap of being too prideful. Same thing that happened with Nebuchadnezzar, where the Lord caused Nebuchadnezzar to go out into the field and act like an animal. for 7 years. You know what I'm saying? Before he was restored. But go ahead.
Verse 4. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him.
So he was the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, with all these nations at this time. You know what I mean? He was just building a mighty strong host, meaning a mighty army from all the places that he was getting. You know how big Asia Minor was? You know what I'm saying? In India today, they have about 1,000. They have about 1 billion people living in India. You know what I mean? He built a mighty army. But go ahead.
Wherefore he called his verse 5. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth.
All right, so now this is talking about the 4 wings that it was talking about on the leopard. Remember we talked about that earlier in Daniel's visions, right? And the 4 heads. This is talking about his 4 generals that ruled after him, right? And the only way you're going to be able to break down prophecy is if you come into the UPK. You know what I'm saying? Your Christian church is not teaching you, nor do they know any of these prophecies, because they're still in darkness. This is still a mystery to them. You know what I mean? Go ahead. And the mystery is only going to be revealed to the Lord's servants. Go ahead.
And had brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them.
So he parted his kingdom into 4 sections. And now these four men, these 4 generals, have crowned themselves. Go ahead.
While he was yet alive.
Yep.
So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died.
Yeah. And keep in mind, Alexander was a well-known homosexual. You know what I mean? The Greeks were known for making boys into harlots. Give me that real quick, because that's something to keep in mind. You know what I mean? I mean, the soldiers, they preferred men before they would prefer women. You know what I'm saying? Give me Job 3:3. I'm saying, and Alexander, Job 3:3. And keep in mind, the man that killed him, killed Philip, right, was actually one of Philip's lovers too. You know what I'm saying? So he definitely got that. It was definitely a Greek culture to sleep with men and boys. It was just something that they did. It was a fad. You know what I mean? They would marry, the idea of monogamy, they would marry a woman and give them half their possession, which is where, monogamy comes from. It comes from Greek and Roman culture. But when it came to pleasure, it was always with boys and fellow soldiers. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Job 3 verse 3. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for an harlot, and sold a girl for wine.
And this is what those nasty Greeks were doing to us. They were casting lots for our people, right? They were betting on our people. They were auctioning off our people. Go ahead.
Continue.
Jump one up. Jump one up, so we can know who they're talking about.
Verse 2. I will also gather all.
Yeah, we go with that, because I don't want to take too much out. So now, we're at when they split the 4 kingdoms, right? Keep going. In Maccabees.
Maccabees, chapter 5, verse 7.
Yep.
So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evil were multiplied in the earth.
And so did their sons after them many years, and evil really excelled, on the earth at this time, when these 4 came to power. And the most evil, the most wickedest of them all was a guy by the name of Antiochus. He was the one that set about to change the laws and to sway the leaders of our people and to forbid us of keeping our the laws of the Most High. He was the one that did evil towards us and really set about to Hellenize us. We'll get more into that. I just want to get the 4 commanders of Alexander. If I can get that real quick on the Google machine. And then we're going to end it right there.
The what?
4 commanders of Alexander.
Okay.
We're going to end it right there, and then we're gonna jump into Antiochus, which is going to be, and then the following week we'll jump into the periods of Hanukkah and why we celebrate Hanukkah.
The commanders of Alexander, right?
God. 4 generals of Alexander. And then we're going to end it right there.
Generals or commanders?
Go to, type in 4 commanders of Alexander, right? And then you're going to go to a thing called www.ancient.eu, the Hellenistic world. See it?
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah, let's get it.
All right. I just got to load up. Alexander the Great. I mean the Greek. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's tripping, man.
We're only going to spend about 2 minutes. I just want to get right to the generals.
Talking about Alexander Zeus.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where you want me to start?
The Hellenistic world.
Hellenistic world. Let me scroll down to that.
The title should say the Hellenistic world. So when you type in the 4 commanders, Alexander, right?
Yeah.
Type that
on Ancient OU.
Yeah. 4 commanders, Alexander, and then you want to go to ancient, .eu. And on the top, it should say, when you click on it, it should say the Hellenistic world.
That's not what it says over here. Let me bring it back. How about Alexander? Okay.
You see?
No.
See it?
Alexander the Great, EU,
No.
AU.
Scroll up. Scroll all the way up.
Huh?
Scroll all the way up. No, put FOUR.
Huh?
FOUR commanders. Take the other. Scroll down.
Yeah.
See Hellenistic world?
Right there.
Yeah, let's get that real quick. Right before it says Greek culture, start at the verse 1. 2 minutes and we're out of here.
Start at the first chapter?
Yeah.
First
Yeah.
paragraph? The Hellenistic world, from the Greek word Hellas, from Greece, is the known world after the conquest of Alexander the Great.
So this is when the Hellenistic world came about. It was after Alexander the Great, after he had died and given his power over to his 4 commanders. But go ahead.
It corresponds roughly with Hellenistic period of ancient Greece, from 323 BCE, Alexander's death, to the annexation of Greece by Rome in 146 BC.
So from the Greco to Roman Empire, it spanned over 200 years, right? The Hellenistic period, right? 200 years of brainwashing and torture from these heathens. Go ahead.
Although Rome's rule ended Greece's independence and autonomy, it did nothing to significantly change, nor did it any way halt the Hellenization of the world of the day.
Now, keep in mind, they set about to Hellenize not only the provinces that we were in Jerusalem and all that, but they were trying to get this all across the world. You know what I mean? Which is why Greek was which is why the New Testament is written in what? In Greek. Because that was the language of the world, right? Just like English is the language of the world today. But go ahead.
Hellenization of the world of the day. In fact, it encouraged it.
Go ahead.
Alexander the Great of Macedon led his army on a series of campaigns which successfully conquered the then known world of Macedon
From Macedon.
from Macedon through Greece down to Egypt, across Persia to India. Alexander's tutor was the Greek philosopher Aristotle,
Go ahead.
who impressed upon him the value of Greek culture and philosophy. As Alexander campaigned, he spread Greek thought and culture in his wake, thus Hellenizing to make Greek in culture and civilization.
And that's the key, and that's what he did. And those are the Gentiles, the Jews that lived in Gentile states. That's what happened. They took on Greek culture and civilization, and that's why Paul had a hard time working. And that's why Paul was set on the hardest mission to try to convert these cats that grew up under Greek culture. Go ahead.
After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his 4 generals, known in Latin as the Diadochi, the name by which they are still referenced from the Greek.
Now, just name these 5 cats. We're gonna end it. Lysimachus,
who took Thrace and much of Asia Minor.
So this general took that. Go ahead.
Caesar controlled Macedonia and Greece.
Go ahead.
Ptolemy the First ruled Egypt, Palestine, and Cilicia, Petra, and Cyprus. He founded the Ptolemaic dynasty, which lasted until the death of Cleopatra the 7th in 30 BCE.
And then the last one?
Seleucus the First, Nicator, ruled the remainder of Asia and founded the Seleucid Empire, which was comprised of Mesopotamia and Levant, Persia, and part of India.
Next, read that last line and we're done.
To greater or lesser extents, all of this region was Hellenized as Greek culture and religious belief influenced those of the indigenous people.
And that's what these 4 command generals did after the death of Alexander, is that they Hellenized all these regions under these and it just named all the regions that it Hellenized. So now, when you read the New Testament and it talks about the Gentiles, there's 2 references to the Gentiles. There's those that were not non-Israelites, and there were those that were Israelites that were Hellenized under the Greeks. And with that, we're going to start next week. We're going to continue this next week, and we're going to go into Antiochus, who really set the stage when it concerning the Israelites on Hellenization. And with that, shalom.